All right, here we go. Today we have lawyer Drew Findling, a.k.a. the billion-dollar lawyer, who most recently represented YFN Lucci in his RICO case, as well as representing Boosie, Cardi B, Lil Baby, Shaq, Dennis Rodman, Gucci Mane, the Baby, Migos, and even Donald Trump in the past. Welcome to VladTV.
Glad to be here, Vlad.
Well, it's a pleasure to actually sit down with one of the big lawyers in Atlanta who's represented a lot of people that I actually know personally and I've interviewed. But I want to start with your whole story. So you grew up in Long Island.
I did.
Okay. And did you know you wanted to be a lawyer early on?
No idea. First lawyer I ever met in my life, Vlad, was the first law professor that walked in my first class. It was a criminal law professor, walked in, and that was the first lawyer I ever met.
Okay. And from there on in, you decided you're going to become a lawyer?
Yeah, I was already in law school. I was kind of aimlessly in law school. I come from very humble beginnings, raised by a single mom, my sister and I. Didn't have any idea what a lawyer did, but it just seemed like something to do after college. Went to a really good law school. Still can't believe they accepted me. And went to a civil firm. I was in the civil firm for about 6 months. Was bored to death, was thinking of jumping out the window, but we were on the second floor, so with my luck, I would have just broken a hip. So I decided to look for better work, read an article about the new public defender of Fulton County, and called him up at 9 a.m. the next day, that Monday, and I was the first guy he ever interviewed, became a public defender, and then the rest is history.
Okay, so you became a Fulton County public defender.
Yes.
Right after you finished the Georgia bar.
Yes, virtually within months. It was with a civil firm, hated it, and went to the public defender's office and realized that I had a passion for doing criminal defense work. But most importantly, Vlad, I back in the day, you could try cases almost immediately. 2 of my kids are public defenders. One of them now is not. He's with our firm, but it's more difficult to get on trial these days right away. There's a lot of oversight. Back then, man, it was Wild West. You were out of law school and you were trying murder cases within a couple months. And so I fell in love with the excitement and the adrenaline rush and of course, the whole process of representing another human being. And that was it. I was hooked for life.
Well, a lot of people hear horror stories about public defenders. You always say, get a real lawyer, not a public defender, because the public defender is in bed with the judge and they're just trying to get the cases off their desk and they're not going to try very hard. And you'll go to jail with a public defender. You've always heard this. And
yeah, I think that's bullshit. In fact, there's video out there you can find of me years ago, during the pandemic, right? We were kind of sitting around with nothing to do. So I was just yapping. I believe that the realest lawyers, I always say, are public defenders. I always say in private practice, if you really know what you're doing, and sadly in my profession, I say all the time, there's a lot of people playing pickup ball right now at a basketball court, but 1/millionth of 1% become NBA players. Well, unfortunately in my profession, anybody could be a trial lawyer. So your odds are greater having a great trial lawyer at the public defender's office than you are some dude that's just trying to make their car payment and pay their rent. So I think, generally speaking, the larger percentage of great trial lawyers are at the public defender's office.
Okay. And you were the first, attorney in the country that actually presented a case for battered women syndrome based on only verbal abuse.
Yeah, great research. You're absolutely right. It was really life-changing for me, Vlad. I was one of these people. It's very different now. Most people, don't go to law school right out of school. Like my son, they get business experience. He was in commercial real estate, and then they do it. It was a little different for me. I got out of college, and all of a sudden, I'm 25 years old. I'm trying murder cases. I was really fortunate. I got on a real roll at 25 years old, and I was banging out trials and winning cases one after the other. So I was getting bigger and bigger cases and starting to generate publicity in my mid-20s. And then I got appointed a case that I felt I can use the battered woman syndrome, but there was no evidence that the guy had ever hit the woman before. And so I decided to go out on the limb and say, well, verbal threats can be just as egregious and just as scary as being hit. Put the defense up. Her name was Doris Jean Norman. Walked her. She was found not guilty, and I kind of got national publicity before I knew it. I'd barely been on maybe 2 or 3 plane flights my whole life at that point. I was getting flown around the country, giving speeches to lawyers 20 years older than me. National publications were writing about me. And so that chain of events really changed things for me.
Interesting. So you could be a battered woman or a battered man just because someone verbally has abused you and never actually put a hand on you?
So that's a defense we put up, and it took the jury a couple of days, but they came back not guilty. And then after that, as in anything in life, right? If somebody finds out you're a dentist that's great at putting in veneers, everybody calls you, right? If you're a great heart surgeon, everybody calls you. All of a sudden, I started getting these phone calls, and I was getting calls from around the country. And so I left the public defender's office and went into private practice and just started picking up a lot of these cases. And so there was at one point, I was clearly representing more women charged with murder than anybody in the United States, and disproportionately winning more than anybody in America. And I got phone calls from coast to coast.
Okay, so that woman beat a murder case because she was verbally abused by her boyfriend or husband?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. When you look at, for example, the Jonathan Majors case and how he was found guilty over, there's some verbal abuse in there, there's some physical abuse, but it seems like it was mostly him trying to fight her off. And ultimately the charges were very, very low. But obviously the penalty for someone like him was massive. He lost his Marvel deal. Being that you have this type of background with battered women and so forth, how do you feel about that case?
Well, so I'm literally so busy. It's hard for me to keep up with other folks' cases. So I definitely try, not to Monday morning quarterback, because really I don't know what's in what we call the discovery. Like, I have no idea what was really in the case. But I'm always interested in these other cases. And I would really have to do a deep dive. But I always get concerned about lengthy sentencing. Obviously, if you do research on me, I'm really not a big jail person. I think this country disproportionately puts people, particularly people, and even more specifically men of color, in jail for ridiculous reasons for ridiculously long periods of time. So on that level, something like that bothers me, but I guess we'll see what ultimately happens to him.
Got it. Okay, so you end up leaving the public defender's office. You went private. By 2018, you were named the president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that was, so it's kind of interesting, because Vlad, I know about your deep connections to the music industry, and particularly the hip hop industry. And as you know, and I still can't figure out how I'm so connected to all these women and men that I love so dearly. But there's really a connection, if you don't mind me saying, to that presidency and that. When I had always been involved, as all criminal defense lawyers should in the country. That's almost like our unofficial union, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. They're one of the most powerful bar associations in America, and they speak for the criminal defense bar. And I was always involved, but never thought I had really the time to try to ascend to something like the presidency, which is incredibly busy and it requires a lot of travel. But when I did the South Georgia Migos case, I was really disheartened by the way that these guys, these three young men of color, and all the people that were with them were treated down there. And I mean, I had to find 15, 16 lawyers to represent everybody involved. I felt the case was replete with racism. And I thought to myself during that 9-month ordeal, we can have a huge budget. We can have the best lawyers in the South, if not America, involved. And still, these guys are getting hammered by racist law enforcement. If that's going to happen to them, then what's going to happen to the poorest of the poor in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Arkansas, in Oklahoma? And the only way that I felt that I can deal with it is to try to, on a national level, get involved. So that really was the catalyst for me to want to aspire to be the president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Okay, and I remember the Hollywood Reporter actually did an article, and you were named as one of Hollywood's top 20 troubleshooters.
Yeah.
Okay, and your clients are pretty extensive. Cardi B, Migos, like you mentioned, Gucci Mane, The Baby, Waka Flocka, Lil Baby, Dennis Rodman, Shaquille O'Neal, and our biggest regular guest, Boosie.
My guy.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these cases here. So Cardi B, what'd you end up doing with her?
Yeah, so before COVID started, Cardi had this nightclub case in Queens. And she already had lawyers working on the case. As you know, her husband, I've known him since he's a teenager. I'm incredibly close with him. And obviously, all three of the Migos, including Takeoff, may he rest in peace, and their families. And so when Cardi became part of Offset's world, then at some point, even though she had other representation in New York, they reached out to me and asked me to jump on board. And I worked on that case for years. Obviously, like a bunch of cases around America, it got slowed down by COVID. But on the cusp of trial, literally the Thursday before trial, I mean, we had 600 jurors scheduled to come in. We received a resolution that was more than satisfactory to Cardi to continue her career, and the rest is history.
Okay, that's where the girl got beat up in the Queens nightclub, and Cardi got charged for that?
Yeah, she and a couple other people got charged, yeah.
Okay, and ultimately she got probation?
Yeah, and it was almost instantaneously kind of suspended upon the speeches that she gave to the community.
Got it. Okay, Gucci Mane, what'd you do with him?
So I met Gucci Mane, and it's funny. So a little nuance about me is I really call everybody by their civilian names, and for some reason, everybody that I represent prefers that. It's just been a habit of mine from the beginning. So I always think of him as Raydrick. If I called him up and said Gucci, he would think it was the wrong number. But Gucci came to me in the Harlem Nights case, and it was the hitting a soldier that was, just in civilian clothes at a nightclub one night, getting into a dispute, and he got referred to me. I represented him in that case, and while I was representing him, he picked up the federal gun case, possession of firearm by a convicted felon, and represented him in that. And so I kind of jointly handled all those, and there was a lot going on for him. And so what we did is eventually I had to globally resolve all of his cases because he had these essentially three things going on at once. He had the Fulton County Harlem Nights case, the federal gun case, and that gun case took place in a county that had the option of charging him. I had to close up shop, resolve that case, convince everybody that this was an anomaly, was able to do that, and then go back to the judge and kind of show the judge that he was entitled to get about 5 or 6 months back. And so, as you recall, we got him out early on that. And it's one of the most satisfying things in my career because Gucci's just been on fire ever since. I mean, I think it's fair to say that since we got him out early, his career has been, 100 times bigger and better than it ever was beforehand. And I use him as an example to so many of my clients, how you can use the worst experience of your life to make it essentially the best experience of your life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Gucci, before he went to prison, was a madman. And now people think he's a clone. He's such a different Gucci. I mean, you're right.
Yeah, so the thing about, my opinion about this profession, and I know you're so intimately familiar with so many folks, is the one thing that pisses me off was when, like, for example, as you know, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, at some point, I spent, 2.5 weeks interviewing 115 potential jurors in YFN. And I see the way that the prosecution and law enforcement look at people in hip hop or rap, and the community does. And I look at it really different because as opposed to everybody else, I'm sitting face to face with them all the time. And I think the profession is filled with people with incredible brilliance. I can't finish Roses Are Red, Violets Are, and then I just freeze up. But these women and men can go on for 6 minutes freestyling and actually be thematic about it. And people, if they pay attention, they're not just shooing out profanity, but they're talking about life experiences. So I have an incredible appreciation for their brilliance. And Gucci is really a standard of that. I mean, most people wouldn't know that he voraciously reads. Most people haven't been in a conversation with him and know that he has a better vocabulary than 99% of the lawyers that I'll see in court next week. He's a brilliant guy. And as many people know, when he got out of serving that time in I think it was in Terre Haute, Indiana, I'll never forget, I took my son, who's now an attorney at my office, Zach, with me. We went to visit him at this house he had rented. And up on the wall, he had all the lyrics that he had spent 3 years writing. And I'm like, this guy is fucking brilliant. It's amazing. And so, you know, it's a real attribute to him and to me, generally to the industry.